So thanks everyone for being here. It's July, which for us means it's pretty darn hot. It's been pretty dry. And I've been out with many ranchers who have been pretty stressed out. And so that's one of the reasons why I decided to call you all together to see if we can kind of speak together about some solutions for drought. I think that we've got a great, broad panel of people that can kind of speak to the conditions, but also how to deal with drought and how to move through it. So I'm just going to start with Justin. Justin, you have such an awesome team, and I love seeing you guys work together. And I thought that I would just let you introduce your team, and then I'll introduce, I guess, Kevin and Steve and I.
Thanks, Annie. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity. My name is Justin Derner. I'm a rangeland scientist and also very fortunate to be the research leader for the Rangeland Resources and Systems Research Unit, headed out of Fort Collins, and we handle rangeland management, conservation, production issues, primarily in the Western Great Plains, and have a long-term research stations with data going back into the 1930s. So what you'll see today is an effort from some of those studies, but also some new ongoing efforts in terms of tools, technology, and some really interesting stuff on the ground with producers. So with that, I'd like to have David Augustine and then Dannele Peck introduce themselves as part of our team.
Yes, hello, I'm David Augustine. I am a research ecologist based out of Fort Collins, Colorado, and I work for Justin's research unit. And we focus on the Western Great Plains, and especially all of Eastern Colorado. And my emphasis is more on the vegetation side of rangeland management and forage production, and thinking about how we approach drought from the forage side.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dannele Peck. I am a member of Justin's team at the Rangeland Unit. I'm also director of the Northern Plains Climate Hub, which is a group that tries to make weather and climate information more accessible and more usable for ranchers and other agricultural producers in the Northern Plains. So I'll be talking today about one of our tools, and that's GrassCast. More to come.
And John, can you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I am John Ritten. I am an agricultural economist up at the University of Wyoming. I did do my PhD down at CSU, and I've been lucky enough to continue to collaborate with those people and with Justin's unit as well. So got some really good collaborations with this group, and hopefully we can have some information we can put out for you guys. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. And Kevin.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kevin Jablonski. I'm a range ecologist at Colorado State University. I'm here today in my role as a supporter of extension. One of my jobs is to build better collaboration and communication on rangeland extension and research in Colorado. So I'll mostly listen, but I'm here to support Annie and this really wonderful group of cross-disciplinary and cross-institutional researchers and practitioners.
Great, thanks. And Steve, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, Steve Oswald from Cotopaxi, which is west of Canyon City. We have a cow-calf operation, direct market our beef. We're in the steely grip of drought and grasshoppers.
And I'm Annie Overlin, Regional Range Management Specialist for Colorado State University. So essentially I cover the plains and really east of the divide and also the San Luis Valley. So Steve, let's talk a little bit about the conditions for you right now. What is it like out there right now?
Well, it's pretty grim. I keep very accurate rainfall records, and those show we're very below normal. Not much green growing on my ranch except for the sub-irrigated meadows which run down through us. So we operate on about 11,500 acres, and out of that, we'll probably raise 300 this year, which is a challenge.
Yeah, and one interesting thing about Steve's ranch is he their ranch has a pretty large elevational gradient. It goes from, what is it, 88 to 55. So all the way down to the Arkansas River. So that's kind of where they are. So you're dry throughout the whole thing. Yep. And I'll just speak, where we are in Beulah, it's also really dry. We'll just get one cutting of hay this year. Most people are buying hay now, and we're kind of in this holding pattern where we're waiting for these afternoon thunderstorms. Hopefully we'll get something to materialize and go from there. So it's we'll see how it goes. But we're definitely in this, we talk all the time like, it's gonna rain, it's gonna rain. We know it's gonna rain. And we know that's not always the best strategy. So, Justin, let's start off with you talking about kind of our long-term forecast, and then we'll go to Dannele and we can, and actually, David, can you talk just really briefly about the conditions at CARM at the Central Plains Experimental Range?
Certainly.
And where that is for people?
Sure. So our research group manages an experimental ranch in northeastern Colorado in Weld County. So ours is a little different operation because it's 16,000 acre property where we run yearling steers only. So we are just grazing cattle from May to October each year. And so we're not as concerned with, how are we going to get through the winter, because all of the cattle are going to leave in October, and we're all headed to feedlot then. I should preface this as saying all of the cattle that graze on our experimental ranch are owned by local ranchers who provide them to us we have 5 different operators that provide them to us. So we're running about 1,200 head there, and we stock it based on a level that certainly can create concerns when we run into a drought. So as of mid-June this year, so we started an intensive study following the drought of 2012. Beginning in 2013, we started a study to help us think more about how to manage, how to flex our stocking rates in response to weather. And we've been running slightly, what I would call a slightly above moderate stocking rate based on NRCS recommendations. So from 2013 through 2019, we didn't have any trouble supporting that herd through the growing season. But this is the first year where we've really seen some real concerns in terms of forage availability. By mid-June, this is definitely the driest spring that we've had in the past 8 years since 2012. And by mid-June, we were able to do some forage estimation. We have a lot more resources than typical ranchers, so we have a team of people who are out taking measurements in all of our pastures of forage availability. And by mid-June, we estimated that we were about 62% or 65% of normal relative to what we expect for forage production. And furthermore, we were able to make some projections that with that level of forage production, there was no way we were going to be able to support 1,200 steers through to October. We were probably going to come up somewhere around 30 to 45 days short. So we were definitely getting very concerned. We made some adjustments based on that knowledge to plan to graze our pastures a little heavier than normal to try to get them through the rotation further. And we were quite concerned. And that is, in Weld County there, we were doing, according to the drought monitor, we were 65% of normal, we estimated, but we were still much better than most other counties in eastern Colorado at that time. Fortunately, on June 27th, we did get a major thunderstorm that came through the ranch, dropped anywhere from 1 to 2 inches of rain on all of the pastures that we're managing there. And so that really changed our outlook. But prior to that, we were certainly very concerned. With that extra rain, we think we can probably make it through the summer. But again, we're not worried about grazing cattle over winter.
Right. So Steve, how does this season compare to other seasons in terms of spring moisture for you guys?
Well, there's been other years that have been this dry, but this is unusual in the fact that we had basically no moisture from June on last year. So we entered winter very dry, spring very dry. Here we are.
Yeah. Okay.
So
it's like the accumulation.
It's the
of
accumulation.
seasons, right?
You know, this is the fourth drought that we've dealt with since 2001, and this, in some ways, is the worst one, just because of that accumulated effect.
Right. Okay. Okay. And I remember when I was a kid growing up on the plains, you know, the 80s and 90s, it was so much greener than it is now. And I think that we're still a little bit into that mentality of, you know, we're going to get these thunderstorms. They're a little bit more predictable. And so, Justin, would you say that we are still kind of in range management operating with this memory of having a more stable climate?
Yeah, Andy, one of the things that we're fortunate at the research station in the collaboration with Colorado State and University of Wyoming is to look at some of the long-term records. And we see some really cycles going on across that in terms of climate. And I'll showcase a slide here in a little bit that captures that. But you're right, the 80s and 90s were a period where it was very, very nice in terms of ranching. Very few droughts, very lush vegetation. I was actually sampling as a PhD student up on that Central Plains experimental range, and it was hard to believe that was short grass prairie at the time. But that markedly changed in the 2000s, and we see these kind of bigger scale and longer term patterns kind of provide the context, and then how we deal with the interannual and the intra-season variability, you know, that David just talked about, a very dry spring punctuated by a thunderstorm. We're starting to see that sort of increasing climate variability play out in terms of management. And how do we do that, right, with our current kind of a dogma of scientific understanding and practical ranch experience, largely based in the 80s and 90s, right, where we had a period of pretty stable conditions. So let's equate that here. I'll showcase this slide here for everybody. Once I do, Annie, please give me the thumbs up when you can see that.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay. This slide here is a compilation of some data that we've been able to pull together, again, from our research station, started back in 1939 and working with, again, climatologists and others. What I want to do is work my way from the top of that slide down. And at the top, it says PDO phase. So what is PDO? That is our Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Well, my goodness, what does that mean for range management? What does that mean for eastern Colorado? What that is that's the temperature of the surface of the water off of the Pacific coast. And what does that do to impact us? Why would it have any impact in eastern Colorado? Well, view that as essentially a big bathtub out there. If that phase is cold, so if that water is cold, how much steam, how much moisture do you get in the atmosphere if you take a cold shower? Well, it's probably good on a day after a long drive or we need to wake up, but it's not good for getting moisture from the Pacific Ocean across all that landmass over the Rockies into eastern Colorado. So usually during those phases, that's a period when we have, on average, pretty dry conditions. And if we look at the last couple of phases of that, and these are largely 15 to 30 years, longer term things, 1945 to 77, that included the 50s droughts, some of the 60s. And then that phase that Annie talked about from 99 now up to 2013, very dry. We had a period there where lots of droughts. Let's contrast that with on the right side, the warm there. So that's a period when we have a warm bathtub. We get a lot of moisture coming off the Pacific coast, coming up over into eastern Colorado, and we have a chance then, again, on average, to have wetter than better or wetter than average conditions. So 1978 to 1998 was a very good set of years. And then we just transitioned in 2014 to a series now where the bathtub out there has become warm again. So that provides kind of a broader context in terms of general patterns, and these largely, again, repeat on about a 15 to 25 to 30 year cycle. So that provides us context. Now that then is mediated or at least influenced by what happens with the second phase down, that ENSO phase. So that's the El Nino Southern Oscillation. A lot of people here talk about the La Nina, the El Nino. So that's the surface water at the equator. And again, another bathtub for us. So when that's cold, as on the left, just like it is on the Pacific water, it's hard to get water in the atmosphere, and that's largely then conducive for dry conditions. So when we have La Nina, that's usually when we have droughts across the Great Plains. When we have neutral, we're kind of in that we don't know, flip a coin mentality. And when we have the El Ninos like we had last year, that's usually a year for most of the Western Great Plains of above average precipitation. Now, if it's warm, right, like we currently are with the PDO phase, again, we have that same sort of thing. La Nina then takes that sort of situation down a notch and provides us with a management situation down on the bottom where we should largely decrease our stocking rates, because chances are that the prevailing sea surface temperatures on the equator might dry us back out. Let's look at then the next phase, the local precipitation. And we talked about the here with the ranching and what David talked about us at the Central Plains Experimental Range, what those local conditions do in terms of being dry and then having a wetting event. And then Dannele's going to talk about this after me in terms of what's the predictive ability of having some seasonal forecast for local precipitation. But there we can look at kind of a three-tiered system. How is it? Is it low? We know out there if we dig a postal, it's hard to do. We have dry soils. We've had a very poor fall, for example. Are we kind of average? Things are okay, or we're in a surplus situation. So let's take the right-hand scenario, Annie. I'll work us through a scenario of 2020, what we looked at. We know that we're in the warm PDO phase. That bathtub on the Pacific coast has some moisture. In 2020, we switched over the fall into the winter into a neutral phase. We're right down the middle. We came out of an El Nino last year, switched to neutral. Now we have kind of a three-way decision tree at the bottom. What's our local precipitation telling us in terms of what we should be doing in terms of forage production and stocking rates? We felt going in through the fall that we were average. We had some vegetation residue on hand, and the forecasts for the spring were kind of blah. They really didn't know. The odds were basically could be dry, average, or wet. We flipped the coin, stayed with the average, and decided then on stocking to kind of maintain our stocking rates where we were. If you'd asked David and myself in mid-June, we erred, right? We should have been on the low side. We should have probably decreased stocking rates. However, that all didn't change with that precipitation in late June. Let's flip forward to 2021, just as an outlook thought here, Annie. We're still warm on the up at the top on the PDO phase. The conditions are we're looking to move to a La Nina this fall. Now, how long that La Nina stays and will be into the next spring, we don't know, but situation is that the odds are tilted to La Nina. Suggestion then for producers, if you follow that arrow down, for 2021, we should be looking at decreasing our stocking rates, reducing our herd numbers, being very conservative on how we stock those rangelands there in eastern Colorado.
Great, Justin. You explained this so well. Thank you.
And then, Annie, I'll turn it over to Dannele. Dannele has, again,
Justin,
I have.
Oh, excuse me. All right.
Justin and Annie, could I just step in for 1 second?
Yeah.
Sure.
I just want to point out when we're in this kind of framework here, when we're looking at the local precipitation amount, I want to emphasize we're really talking about fall and winter moisture when we're talking about this here. We're talking we Justin and I and the folks in our stakeholder group that manage the cattle at the experimental range, we're really using this over winter and coming into the growing season. This is not something we're looking at during the growing season. This is pre-growing season. So when we look at this local precipitation amount down here at the bottom, we're really talking about how much precipitation or how much soil moisture do we have going from, say, October through March into April. And then this is just setting the stage for the other tools. And then as we go into February, March, April, we're starting to look at other tools to look at the outlooks, the projections for the weather. So I just want to clarify the local precipitation amount. This is something we're mostly thinking about fall to winter precipitation. And how are we thinking about what we're going to do with our stocking rates going into the growing season?
Okay, great. Thanks for that, David. Let's transition into Dannele with GrassCast. And Dannele, are you going to talk drought monitor at all?
I am, Annie, and so we'll get our slides switched here. Give me just a second to pull those up for you and get it in presentation. Great. Can everybody see the slide okay?
Yep.
Great. So as Annie said, I'll start out kind of with current conditions. I think a lot of people are familiar with the drought monitor. This is from the National Drought Mitigation Center. The drought monitor, this was made July 7th, so just a couple of days old, and it confirms, what everybody is seeing and feeling out on the ground. Much of southern Colorado is in D3, or what they consider extreme drought. And so that's just to suggest that there aren't very many other years that have been this severely dry in southern Colorado. And so that's no surprise to Steve and our other ranchers. You guys know it's dry out there. But it's nice to see the drought monitor reflecting conditions correctly out on the ground. Moving on, looking forward. So not just looking out our windows, but looking forward. What can we expect for the rest of the growing season? I'd like to introduce you to GrassCast if you haven't seen it yet. It's the Grassland Productivity Forecast. The idea here is instead of just handing our ranchers our precipitation outlook for the rest of the season and saying, good luck, I don't know what this means for you. We instead took one extra translation step for them and kind of converted the precipitation outlooks into a grassland or rangeland outlook. So just generally speaking, real quick, GrassCast, it takes a look at the weather that we've observed up to the date that the map was made, and then tries to fill in the rest of the growing season with what we think might happen with regards to the weather. We put those two pieces together to tell you, do we expect grassland productivity in your county to be some percent higher or lower than your county's long-term average? So what does GrassCast look like? I'd love to be able to show you a single map like this, but again, this is trying to look into the future. And we know that it's really difficult this time of year, in Colorado especially, to correctly forecast what might happen to the precipitation, right? Colorado gets a lot of its summer storms through summer rain through convection storm, thunderstorms, and those are really hard to predict. So we don't want to just hand you a single GrassCast map and tell you to trust us. Instead, we give you 3 different possible scenarios. We've observed the weather up to the current date. Let's fill in the rest of the growing season with 3 potential scenarios. What if precip for the rest of the growing season is above normal, right? Our prayers come true and we get some good miracle rains. What would grassland productivity, what would the estimate be in that situation? But what if that's not right? What if we just get near normal amounts of precip from here through the end of August? What do the GrassCast maps look like then? And finally, what if the spigot stays off for the rest of the growing season? How bad might it get? So we have 3 GrassCast scenarios. And so I'm gonna 3 maps. It looks a little overwhelming, but stick with me here. We're going to hone in on an area of interest, and I've just circled an example location here down in southeast Colorado because it has good colors for explaining the GrassCast maps. So we're going to start over on the left, on the optimistic side. What if the rest of the growing season we get above normal precipitation for this area? How many pounds per acre might we expect to grow compared to what's average for this location? So over in that left map, it's yellow. So if the spigot opens up, we get those miracle rains. This area of southeast Colorado, we would expect to end up with 5 to 15% of their average forage or rangeland vegetation. So even if we get the miracle rains, we're still looking at below average amounts of forage. The nice thing about GrassCast is that it tells you how much less. So 5 to 15% at best. If the precip from now through August, the end of August, is just near normal, then we look at that middle map, and it's orange for this area. And that tells us that with near average amounts of precip, conditions aren't going to be so great on rangelands, and we should be ready for 15 to 30% fewer pounds per acre than is normal for this area. So pretty significant hit. And then over on the right, apologies that my animation didn't quite work out right, but over on the right, again, kind of worst case scenario. If the spigot stays closed, it's below normal amounts of rain for the rest of the season, like it has been all season, that area is red, and that's our most severe category. It means that we should expect 30% less, if not worse, pounds per acre compared to an area's average. So that's just an example. I want to zoom in now. If you go to the GrassCast webpage, you can zoom into your area, and you can even zoom in a lot closer than this, but I wanted to show kind of the Colorado, New Mexico region. And so I'll move to a more specific example here, but I just wanted to feature that if you do go to the GrassCast website, you can type in your zip code, you can type in your address, or you can just click the plus and minus signs to kind of get to your 6 mile by 6 mile area. That's the smallest scale that GrassCast operates at. On this page, you're seeing a lot of oranges and a lot of reds, like we did at that broader scale Great Plains region.
So Dannele, really quick.
Yeah.
I have a question. So in that example that you just gave, it's important to note that even if we're above normal, we're still expecting below production. And that's because of the accumulation of soil moisture throughout the season. Is that right?
That's right, Annie. GrassCast, we start putting it out in mid-April. At which point we've observed almost none of the growing season. It's almost all of it's almost a guess of what might happen. But then we update it every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, we get to observe a little bit more of the actual weather and how much precipitation we did receive. So by now, mid-July, to be honest, we've observed most of the precipitation for the growing season. There's not much time left
to catch up.
And so this map, this one was built at the end of June, is telling us like time is running out. Even if we get miracle rains for the rest of July and August, much of this is already baked into the system. Right. That's why that left map is still red for much of Colorado. Sadly.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah. So just zooming in even closer. Steve, I'm sorry, Cotopaxi is just outside the range of GrassCast. That's the little green dot. I tried to look up GrassCast for you. The reason it's a little bit outside the edges is that you have too many trees, darn it. And our satellites can't see through those trees. So I moved over to the east, kind of right on the boundary of Custer and Pueblo counties. Again, this is our zoomable GrassCast map. And when you do the zoomable maps and click on your area of interest, these 3 boxes pop up to tell you what are the percentages of production for your area. So on the border here, we see this light red or kind of orangish shade in the left 2 maps. Those are telling us again, the prayers are answered and we get some miracle rains in this area. We should still be ready for 15% less pounds per acre this growing season. So that's the best we can hope for. If it's near average precip from here on out, be ready for almost 30% losses. Worst case scenario, the spigot stays off. It could be pretty bad, almost 40%.
Okay.
Fewer pounds per acre. So Annie, one question we always get, again, the die is cast pretty firmly here for below average, but we do often, especially earlier in the season, we get a question about, do we know which of these maps is most likely for our area? And to to answer that question, we actually have to go to our friends at NOAA and look up their seasonal precipitation outlooks. This is the 8 to 14 day outlook. So this is looking out to July 23rd and asking, you know, is precip likely to be above, near, or below average? And there's a big old brown spot with a B over Colorado, suggesting that these next 2 weeks are pretty likely. It's still a roll of the dice. It's just that the dice are loaded towards being below normal precipitation in much of Colorado over these next 2 weeks. And then if we look a month out, that's starting to push the boundaries again. It's tough in Colorado to look too far out in the future. But even the 1 month is leaning pretty heavily towards below normal precipitation. And so unfortunately, the dice are loaded, it seems, towards that middle or right GrassCast map for this area. So I'll stop there, Annie, if you have any clarifying questions.
I do have a question.
Annie, sorry,
you know,
Annie, real quickly, it looks like Kenny has joined us. This one.
All right, hi,
welcome,
Kenny.
Kenny.
So
Hello,
Kenny Burk
maybe
on the line.
my service might be weak. I don't know, but I'm hearing you now.
Okay, we can hear you pretty good, Kenny. Thanks for chiming in. So really quick, Kenny, how are conditions for you and where are you now? I know Kenny runs cattle in quite a few different places. Why don't you talk a little bit about your operation for us? Where you are and where you might have different leases.
Mostly El Paso County, and we're pretty dry. A little bit in West Cliff, and of course it's dry there, but we've been dry the last couple of years, just kind of getting by. But we're in El Paso County. It's the majority of my operation. We haven't grown any grass. We're basically using last year's leftover grass, and if we don't get some rain soon, we won't have any winter feed. But that's kind of where we are. I think there's a lot of people in the same condition, but that's the way it looks where we are.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kenny. We'll talk a little bit in a minute. So
Yeah.
Justin, I have a question for you. You know, I think coming from the plains, we're sort of the eternal optimists that it is going to rain. And some of us did get some rain. Steve got rain a couple days ago. We got rain. Kenny, did you get any rain over the 4th?
No. Yes, we did. We had anywhere from 1/10 to half an inch.
In Hanover?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, Justin, you and a team of people from kind of throughout the West just published a paper on drought throughout the West. And one of the things that you talked about is that Colorado is less predictable in terms of our, I guess it's afternoon thunderstorms or precipitation in general. Can you explain why that is compared to like Montana and New Mexico?
Yeah, Andy, that paper, again, primarily for the Great Plains, involved a lot of great scientists, extension personnel. One of the key findings that you allude to was trying to find some trigger dates or decision dates of when ranchers, land managers can kind of use it as a framework to say this is kind of the best case scenario we have. And July 1 seems to be in the northern Great Wyoming up through the Dakotas, Montana. If you don't have that rain by July 1, you grow very little forage after that period, even though you may get an above average, or as Dannele mentioned, your prayers are answered and you get those miracle rains. And that's because those systems are largely dominated by the cool season grasses, those that grow right in the cooler temperatures. Those would be those plants that produce a lot of that forage, and they just can't have the ability to produce a lot of that forage during the warmer parts of the season. Colorado, though, and most of the areas of the eastern part of Colorado have a good mix of cool season and warm season. The warm seasons being like blue grama, buffalo grass. And so when we get those late afternoon thunderstorms here in late June, July, we can get substantial amounts of growth and green up of the blue-brown buffalo grass and other warm seasons that then provides the opportunity that's unique to Colorado compared to the rest of the northern Great Plains in that ability to buffer and have that prayers answered a little bit. Now, what Dannele showed, though, is that they're still not going to bail you out. You may get some green up and some growth, but those warm season grasses are not highly productive compared to our cool season grasses. So what the ranchers have talked about here is relying on grass that was grown last year, grass that may have grown here in the spring, and then what we can grow in terms of these isolated thunderstorms. And most of those are fairly going to be spatially heterogeneous. Some folks get rain, others don't. And so for planning purposes, those are what can help a situation, especially if you have some large acreages where you can move cattle around to and capture the greenness and the growth on those areas. If you're not in those areas, unfortunately, it's a tough situation for ranchers and land managers to be in. But in general, Andy, I think Eastern Colorado is very difficult, and I think that's why, in terms of our research and others, it's difficult to put just a defined date that you need to make a decision by X and go with it, because we do offer the opportunities for those green ups and some warm season production, those afternoon thunderstorms that we start to see this time of year with the monsoonal moisture.
Yeah. So one of the reasons why I wanted Kenny to be a part of this conversation is in the 2018 drought, I had the opportunity to survey a bunch of ranches in Colorado. And when I went to Kenny's ranch, I was really, really surprised by how much regrowth he got after our first storm. I guess that would have been in August, maybe, Kenny. I don't know if you remember that, when we got rain then.
Yeah,
but
probably so, yep.
Can you talk about why you think you had better regrowth than, say, the neighbors, for example?
Well, I think I was able to, I think I had enough land that I could, move stuff around and get things off the grass to not, eat it all off to where there was some forage left, I think I was in a position that I was to let it be understocked through that time until we could get some rain, and then it seems like it reacts faster, if you have leftover forage. So
yeah. And Kenny, I remember
think,
it was like 1,000 pounds difference between some ranches around you and yours, and we have talked kind of maybe that night about why. I mean, I remember specifically talking to you and saying it seems like you could leave your cattle in longer, and you were talking about how that litter component was so important. And it made me realize that you're really managing your litter component too, so that you can take advantage of that rain.
Well, it looks, what I'm going to start doing over the next 2 weeks is I'll start shipping yearlings, taking them off the grass and lightening up as much as I can, because, they're not doing as good as they should be, and it's not doing the country or the grass, any good either. So I'll take them off. What I'm able to take off and send to the feedlot, which they're going to go to the feedlot anyways, it's just going to be a few months early for me. So, but by getting them off, I'll start saving grass and to where my cows will be able to stay longer, where I have leftover feed for them. So I use my yearlings to fill in if I have extra grass, and then at the same time I will start shipping them out early to get it where I'm pretty lightly stocked for the cows. Is kind of what I've been trying to do. So I'll just what I can get gone, like I might start weaning calves and get the calves pulled off the cows, and then maybe cull 20% of the cows, get rid of some old cows and try to lighten up to get through this time. but that's all I know to do. I mean, if you leave them out there and beat the country up, it won't respond. It's not doing good for the cattle or the land. So
Yeah. I mean, so I guess in your circumstance, you have, I wouldn't say switch to a complete yearling operation, but you have a pretty significant yearling operation, and that's probably what gives you the most, I guess, flexibility in terms of, you know, your range management. And I think that whole marketing side of things is just as important for managing range as anything. So
they're definitely easier to move around or to send to a different place. It's not very easy to send pairs for a short time period, or it's expensive to move pairs. But yes, yearlings are a lot more flexible to get moved around and do different things with, for sure.
Right. Steve, do you want to talk about some of your strategies that you have for moving cattle?
Well, we're similar with Kenny in that we use our yearlings as part of our drought plan. So yeah, the other thing is I do have a written drought plan. I don't know if you all can see that. Probably can't. Should have made a slide of it. But this is a plan that I wrote up when it was raining. And I've identified 3 critical dates: April 15, August 15, November 1st. And set goals, I guess, depending on the moisture.
Let's back up for a second. So when you are recording moisture, you're recording, how often are you doing that? Every day?
Every day.
Yeah. And that goes into your grazing chart.
That goes into my grazing chart here. I'm sorry I don't have a slide, and he didn't tell me that. But I recorded.
You know, it's pretty extensive.
I record all that information down here. It's in 5-day increments, and I've got the running total on a yearly basis, 12-month running total, so I know exactly where we're going, up and down. Right now we're going down, believe it or not. So that at the end of June, the 12-month running total is 11.1 inches. That's from a high of 20 here not too long ago.
So you're comparing your soil moisture from year to year, and so you can say this year is similar to 2012,
Sure.
And that helps you predict how you're going to stock.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm doing is I record the stock days, so now I have a real good idea how many stock days I'm taking off the ranch. And yeah.
So,
I got another one.
Yes, show us what else you have. Oh yeah, oh, nice.
You can't see this very well, but this is, I've got a tool called stock days per acre per inch of rain. And that's like the canary in the coal mine. So I've got 4 years graphed here. Let's see here. This one right here is current right now. So we're not bad. We're not as bad as we were in 2018 yet. It's because I've destocked. We're down 30% in numbers, and that's by weight, not by animals. And the fact that it did rain here recently makes a big difference. So anyway, those are the tools that I use to tell me what the heck's going on and what I should be doing. I got 2001 was a real eye opener for me. I got, I was one of these guys that was hoping for rain, and it never happened. And I got my hat handed to me. Had to sell in a down market, lost a lot of equity. Then he happened again, let me tell you.
Just really quick, can you guys hear me? Yep, you can hear us?
Yes.
Okay, great, great.
Yes.
So Kenny, do you have any wisdom in terms of how you are figuring out how to move cows off your ground?
How to get them off?
Well, when to move?
Oh, well, basically, like I said earlier, I mean, if I can ship yearlings anytime, so they can go tomorrow, and then old cows, if there's any old cows, they're pretty easy to get rid of and clean up through a time like this. And then the next available for me, it's pretty much, you know, if I find corn stalks, but you can't get on those until November, you know, so you're pretty well limited, you know, when they're done harvesting corn. So to find alternative feed sources like hay fields or corn stalks, you've got some time ahead of you there. So so that's just, there's nothing you can do about it. So you have to either get to that point or, you know, sell, or, you know, obviously unless you have some other place to go, you can put cows in a grow yard, but it's not very feasible. But, you know, you can to get by for a short time period. But those are some options, you know, but as far as when to get off, I mean, just when you just have to, or you know, or I mean,
Yeah.
they'll let you know. I mean, the cows will let you know. They'll show
Right.
it.
And that's one thing that I think you and Steve are both really looking at, is the condition of the cow. You want to talk a little bit about that, Steve?
Sure, I monitor that all the time.
The condition of the cow.
BCS score, yep.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so one question that I have now that we're, you know, because we're in this place, is both of you, both Kenny and Steve, you both operate on a lot of leased ground. So do you have any wisdom for, you know, working with whoever you're leasing to in terms of not getting locked into a bad lease, and maybe putting in some drought contingencies into that? Do you have any wisdom there?
Well, you know, most of my lease ground is federal, and just a little bit private.
So what are the sideboards that the BLM is putting on, or state land, for example, in terms of, you know, if we get a drought?
Well, I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
I've always been very cautious.
Yeah.
Well, there's no feed down. It's a winter permit, the one I'm relying on. There's no feed there.
The cows aren't engaged.
They're not going to go down there.
How about you, Kenny?
Oh, my leases are, you know, 5-year to 1-year leases, and it's my choice, you know, what I put on there. So I manage it. It's just up to me. So I make the call. I pay them so much an acre every year, and if it's dry, it's on me. So
Yeah.
I make that choice. I stock it accordingly, and I, you know, time and time again, I mean, it's overgrazing it. The cattle don't do as good, and the land doesn't do as good. You're a lot better off understocking it. You'll get more pounds off that set of cattle with less cattle than you will if you overstock it, trying to, you know, you get less weight on them. I mean, it's just, we've seen it time and time again. It works a lot better to understock, you know, especially during these last, 10 or 15 years we've been in. It's just so unpredictable and dry, you know, so we have to understock so we can continue next year.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk to David about CARM, or either Justin or David. Can you kind of explain what CARM is and what that stands for?
Sure. So CARM stands for Collaborative Adaptive Rangeland Management. And this is really a reference to an experiment that we've been doing at our experimental range since the last drought. So we started in 2013, right after the 2012 drought. And what we're doing there is running an experiment at the scale of our experimental range, which is at the scale of an individual ranch, where we are working with a group of ranchers as well as representatives from conservation organizations, particularly those interested in bird conservation, and then also people from land management agencies. So the Forest Service, who manages the national grasslands, NRCS, CSU Extension. So Annie is our representative for the project from CSU Extension. And so what we're trying to do here is, instead of, in the past, Justin and I run lots of experiments with cattle at the experimental range, and then we report the results. But this was more trying to work collaboratively with a group of people who really understand Eastern Colorado and care about both the livestock, the grass, and as well as the wildlife in Eastern Colorado. And how do we flex our stocking rates? How do we move cattle in space and time? And how do we adjust our stocking rates each year based on all the tools that we have available to us in terms of weather forecasting, in terms of monitoring vegetation condition. And then finally, we're also trying to bring in some of the economics that John Ritten can speak to a little bit later. So basically, we have a herd of cattle that, again, we are only running yearlings, so it's a little more flexible and a little easier for us. But all of these yearlings are contracted for sale in October. So our rancher, right now we can't sell them early. So our goal really is to be able to carry those cattle all the way through to October 1st so they can be sold on contract at that time. And so we maybe have less flexibility than what we just heard from Kenny and Steve in terms of when we can destock. So we're really trying to be conservative enough to make sure that we can get our yearlings all the way through to October, and we want them to be gaining weight. So last year, for the month of September, some of our pastures, the yearlings were losing weight towards the end of September. We want to keep them in positive weight gain territory, and ideally, what our collaborating ranchers want is from May to October, they want to average 2 pounds per head per day or better on all those yearlings. So we can get anywhere from 3 to 4 pounds per head per day when it's nice and green in May and June. But we really have to think carefully about our forage budget and trying to project how much forage are we going to have through the growing season, and not just old dead forage, but how much growth. So how do we use all these different tools that are out there for rangeland monitoring to help us both adjust our stocking rate at the beginning of the growing season? So we're setting our stocking rate in April. So Steve said he has an important decision date of April 15th. That's a really important date for us too. We have the capacity to reduce the number of yearlings we're going to run somewhat. We're placing the orders in October. But we can adjust in April the number that we're going to run somewhat, typically up or down 10%. And so we're trying to, how do we use different tools to make that decision? And then as we go through the growing season, how do we move those cattle? We have a fairly wide range of pastures that vary in their species composition. We have about half of our pastures are dominated by blue grama. About half are dominated more by western wheatgrass and needle and thread. So we have some opportunities to move cattle within the growing season to try to respond to shortages of forage and keep them on the greenest part of the vegetation, and also making sure that they're in a place where they have enough vegetation to be gaining weight, not getting into a weight loss situation. So that's that's kind of a broad overview of what the CARM experiment is. Like I said, we have more resources, and because it's an experimental ranch, we have a lot of people out there monitoring the vegetation, and we also have a lot of folks working in the office with the remote sensing products, trying to see how we can better use remote sensing to keep track of our forage availability as well.
Right, so that's been one of the really cool things about working with your group, is to see the different tools that have been developed that are, you know, and I don't even know this, and I should, but for example, has GrassCast come out of this group? Is that where GrassCast came from?
Not CARM specifically, but it came out of long-term. It started with long-term records from the experimental range.
From the experimental range. Okay, yeah.
Right, and
that is some of the coolest data that I've seen. Is the experimental range has been going for how long? Is it 80 years?
Yes. So it was created in response to the Dust Bowl at the same time that Pawnee National Grassland and Comanche National Grassland were created. And it was created to study as a site to help study beef production for ranchers in eastern Colorado in response to the Dust Bowl. And so one of the great things is the early people that ran this, they started in 1939, and we have really great records of forage production and cattle weight gains and stocking rates. And all of, it's subdivided into about 40 different pastures. So we have good records in many of those pastures going all the way back to 1939 of exactly what was the stocking rate and how well did those cattle gain.
Right, and one of the interesting things that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago was that data has informed some of the NRCS stocking rate.
Yes.
Stocking rate. So that's kind of, I was really interested to see where did this data come from, and it's from this long-term experimental range.
That's
so
right.
David, can you share some of the tools that you have developed for predicting production?
So what I want to talk about first is just one extra step that's out there available to be used with GrassCast and the Drought Monitor. So I'll just share my screen. So can you see the Drought Monitor now?
Yeah.
Great. So when we look at the Drought Monitor, Dannele showed this at the scale of Colorado, but it's very coarse, right? Steve and Kenny already know that southeast Colorado here is in a severe drought, and Justin and I already know that Weld counties, not in a severe drought, but we're definitely below normal. And that's what the Drought Monitor shows. And then, like Dannele showed, you can go into GrassCast and see what it's predicting for the future in terms of where are we going with forage production. But one other tool that I always like to go into and look at is called Veg Drive. And so Veg Drive, it's VEGDRI, and you can just Google that and you'll end up, it's the Vegetation Drought Response Index. And you can zoom into a map for any state in the Great Plains. And what this is it's not a measure of where we're going in the future. It's a measure of where you are right now. How much forage do you have on the ground right now? And the one nice thing about this compared to GrassCast is you can get a little more detail. So this is at a 1 by 1 kilometer grid. And so let's see here. This is El Paso County. Can you see my mouse?
Yep, we can see it.
So here we are in El Paso. And what you can see here is, so Kenny, are you in northern or southern El Paso?
Southern. I'm right on the Pueblo County line north.
And what you can see here in Veg Dry is if you are in southern El Paso, that's a really different situation than if you were in northeastern El Paso. And the other thing it can do is tell you a little bit about the variability. Now, typically, I would say a rancher's going to know more about the variability on their property than this product. But if you have a large ranch or if you have multiple properties spread out, this can give you some better information just on how variable is it across your region. So you can see that southeastern Colorado broadly is in severe drought. And if we go back to GrassCast, you know, Otero and Bent County maybe aren't quite as bad as the rest, but if you look at this average map, I mean, all of southeast Colorado looks terrible in terms of what they're projecting through the future. However, if you go into veg dry, it becomes clear that there are portions of Otero and Bent County that caught some nice rainstorms here. You go up, what is this, Crowley, south, there are patches in here that are actually above average in vegetation biomass right now, in forage biomass, and they're right next to places that are below average. So this can give you an idea of just how variable it is at a finer spatial scale. This is still very limited. What I don't like about this product right now is it's very hard to see where your ranch is on this map. So what I do in working with CPR, and CPR is the Central Plains Experimental Range, and also in working with the ranchers that graze on Pawnee National Grassland, is I can download this map. We go up to northeastern Colorado. I can download the map for Weld County and import it into my geographic information system, and then overlay my pasture boundaries on it and look specifically at a fine scale of what it's showing for my pastures. And that's not something you can do online. And so what I would say is the next step, what I think is missing right now in terms of resources available to ranchers, is the availability for somebody like Kenny or Steve to come and zoom in to a specific pasture and see what that is looking like relative to the long term. And so what's really nice about this veg dry map is it's taking 30 years of data and saying, where are you right now relative to the long-term mean? And as humans, it's hard for us to remember what the 30-year long-term mean is. You know, we don't, sometimes some people are really smart and have great memories. I don't know what the long-term mean is for the past 30 years in every pasture on the Central Plains Experimental Range. But this can just help my memory by enabling me to zoom in and see where are we right now relative to that long-term mean in each of the pastures. Because I can download this and work with it personally in my GIS, I can see each individual pasture at our experimental range. Right now, that capability isn't available to ranchers. And so I think that's the next step, that we're working with a couple of postdocs in our unit and other folks who are really good with remote sensing products to try to get it to where a rancher can actually log in and see where are they right now relative to the long-term mean. Based on the rate at which the satellites go over the Earth right now, Annie, we can't get yesterday's data. So we can't download and see where are we yesterday, but we can get an estimate typically within the past week, of sometime in the last week. Say, sometimes you can get it 4 to 5 days old, maybe sometimes it's 6 to 7 days old. But you can download and get a map at very high resolution of every parcel within your ranch. Where do you stand in terms of your greenness relative to the past 30 years? We just need to work on making that available and seeing how that might help above and beyond just driving around and looking at your pastures.
Right. Do you have an example?
Oh, did you want me to? I didn't bring that up. I can work on bringing that up right now. You want me to show the example that we have for the Central Plains Experimental Range?
Sure.
It's going to take me a minute to find that. So okay. If you have some other things, I will bring that up in a second.
Right. Why don't we switch to John Ritten from Wyoming? John, you're the economist, and it's always important, I think, to bring in, the marketing and economics into our situation right now. Would you like to talk about our economics in light of COVID and the drought?
You're muted, John.
we go. Now I'm unmuted. Sorry about that.
No problem.
So let me bring this screen up and share. Come on, hold on a second. My computer's going slow now. There we go.
Maybe it's the kids are watching a movie right now.
Here we go. Start. Now it won't let me share. Hold on. I kicked David off. Now here we go.
I have mine up now if you want me to go back in.
Well, I just got, can you guys see mine now?
Yeah, we can see you.
Okay, sorry. I'll get through it real quick. See, this will make me quick, David. The Economist always runs long, but I always talk too fast. All right, so yeah, this is a unique drought situation. I've been studying drought since my time down at CSU, so I've been kind of living this for quite a while. There's kind of two things we need to plan for the drought. One is, what do we do now, right? We're in it, we need to react, but then also what do we do to prepare ourselves to be situated for success in the future? I was really glad to hear that, you write your drought plan when it's wet, not when it's dry. So if you're doing it now, we're going to try to scrape through and get by, but as soon as it rains again, start preparing for the next drought. So what do we do now? My question is when I talk to producers, the first thing you need to know, what feed options do you have right now? You need a good inventory of what you have and where. Again, so all of the tools we've talked about so far, grass cast and David's, the veg dry really is helpful, but you need to go out and ground truth that and figure out where you have feed and what you can do. The second thing I'm going to say, and again, this is out of my expertise, I'm an economist, right? What can your range handle for the rest of this year, right? Get an idea of those stock days available to you. What is your supply of food, right, for those cows or for your yearlings? The second thing I'm going to challenge you to do is you need to make some short versus long-term decisions here, right? We're all trying to get through the next 6 to 12 months. I want you to think about the next 6 to 12 years. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But I'm pretty sure, given all the graphs I've seen, we need to decrease our demand for forage. And one of the things we need to do, I think it was Steve that said it, maybe Kenny referenced it as well, is what I'm probably going to do right now. If I'm out there on the ground, is I'm probably going to wean my calves and get them out of there. And then I'm going to selectively cull cows. And I'm going to do those with a couple specific reasons. Getting those calves off that cow, even if they're not eating grass, but at this point in time, depending on your calving day, they're probably consuming some forage as well. But even if not, right, they're getting their energy from the range through mama, right? And so let's get those calves off. Let those cows start to hopefully rebuild some body condition, because if we're keeping them over the winter and accruing those expenses, we need them to produce a calf next year. We need to give her every chance possible to, if she's not pregnant yet, get pregnant. If she is pregnant, maintain that pregnancy and deliver a calf and wean that calf next fall. So let's do everything we can for her to get her through that. And then the other reason I'm going to wean now, or as soon as possible, right? I think it was Kenny said the next 2 weeks, right? Prices are going to go down again, right? COVID related, maybe not, but we're also getting into the seasonal dip here. So here, I'm going to show you a couple of graphs. I try to minimize my graphs, but I need to show a couple. This is the Southern Plains. This is kind of aggregated across all the Southern Plains. The red line is the 2014, 2018. That's a 5-year weekly average price, and this is those 4 to 5 weight steer calves. The dotted line is what happened last year. Up until about March, that solid blue line is this year. We were tracking pretty close. We were going to have a repeat of 2019. And we see that big dip. That is response to packing plants closing. When the packing plants close because of the COVID outbreaks, what happens? Feedlots have nowhere to send their fats. Their fats are standing around in stalls eating feed. Guess what? They can't bring in more animals. Guess what? They don't want to buy any animals right now, so the bidding stops, prices drop. We've just about come back from that as the plants have reopened. Now, I'm not going to say they're going to stay open. I'm not going to say they're going to close, but it's a risk of a roll of the dice at this time. It is a little bit risky as to what happens the next time we have a big packing plant go down. Just to show you, this is not just to this 4.5 or 4 to 5 pound or 4 to 5 weight steer class. Same thing for yearlings, right? We had that 750 pound class, same thing, tracking 2019 really well. End of March, dropped off. July 1st, we're kind of back to normal, but now we're starting to see that tail off, partly because it's getting dry and more animals are coming to market already. So we're starting to depress prices. So I will go back one slide here to that 4.5 weight, 5 weight steer class. Notice that the seasonal peak for those lighter calves in the Southern Plains is earlier than most guys bring their calves to market anyways. If we're bringing them the first week of October, we've missed the high point in prices. Same thing for the yearlings. It's going to peak about August and then start to drop off. So this year, I would argue, we're probably not going to get a lot of gain on those animals in the next 3 months anyways. We're probably going to do some maybe long-term downs, or at least short-term defoliation of those plants. So I want you to really think hard about, is it worth keeping them out there to put on a few more pounds and then get a lower price? I really think we can move on. Same thing's true for the Northern Plains. This is South Dakota, again, that 4 to 5 weight steer class. They were actually trending above last year for a couple months at the end of June. But again, look at that seasonal price peak in the red. It really does peak a lot earlier, and then as calves come to market, it drops off. So I want to get there before this peak this year anyways, because this is going to be steeper than it's been in recent years, because there's going to be more animals coming sooner. It's going to happen before we're used to it. So here's my big question for everybody. How do we prepare for the next year and beyond? Right? This is where we need Dannele and Justin and David to tell us, where are we headed, right? What's going to happen? From a marketing perspective, I can tell you one thing is important, right? A lot of the work I've done has shown that we really need to manage in response to precipitation, to climate and weather, but the markets really drive profitability. If we can manage around nature to take advantage of markets, that's when we do the best. Given the latest cattle inventory numbers, we passed the peak of our expansion phase last year. We are now on the downward side of the cattle cycle. Why does that matter? Prices are negatively correlated to inventory. So in a normal circumstance, as national herd numbers decline, cattle prices increase. I'm going to say should, because there's two things at play here. One is COVID, right? So whether that's packing plants impacting demand for live cattle, or if it's unemployment rates for the next couple of years. If producer incomes are down, they have less available money to spend on products like beef. So the next 2 years could be impacted by COVID. And then drought. That's why we saw that huge spike in prices in 2014, because we wanted to expand, but the Southern Plains drought held us back longer than it should have, given just cattle inventory. People couldn't respond to the price signals because they didn't have grass. So here's what our cattle inventory has done for the last 30 years now. You can see that, you know, we had really higher numbers in the early 90s. In fact, it's been dropping since about the 70s. We're right here, right? We're past that peak. The peak happened last year, dropping off. Are we going to expand quickly, or are we going to continue to decline? That's the big question from the economic side. I will say that data suggests we are still going to decline. This is heifers held as replacements, right? So if we have less heifers held back, we know cows get cold every year. It means as we decrease our retention, we are shrinking the national herd. It's down again 2% as of January 1. I would expect that number to increase in response to the drought. I would expect 2021, January 1 numbers to be down even more. So I think we're still contracting. And again, here's a graph that shows this red number is national cattle numbers. The blue line is that 5 to 6 weight steer class in Western Kansas, right? As numbers go down, prices go up, and we respond to prices as we expect producers to do. They start to build back their herds and prices decline. So this is where we're looking. Again, what's going to happen in the next year? No economist is going to tell you what we're going to do for sure. I will say that we're probably going to continue to see a reduction in numbers. This is the percent change in inventory. We just came out of a 5-year expansionary phase. We're in the first year of a contraction. All these other contractions have been 5 to 7 years. A typical cattle cycle is 8 to 14 years. Most are in 10 to 12. So we're going to have some years where we have declining numbers, right? So what does that mean for you? If I'm running the ranch, I want to get through this year. That's fine. I want to make sure I can still ranch next year, but I'm thinking about 3 to 6 years from now. That's when there are, given, again, there are no major global issues from COVID that are more than a couple years, that's where we're going to see the peak in the cattle prices again. It's probably that 5 to 6 years out. So what do I want to do? It's probably less problematic to destock heavier now, especially those older cows, because they got 2 or 3 calves left in them. They're really producing these low value products for us, right? I'd rather, as both Kenny and Steve referenced to, let's give the range a chance to come back so that we can restock sooner and start to retain those younger heifers, those younger cows that are starting their production right at the peak of that, right before the peak of that cycle, right? I want them to produce high value crops. This is the stock market, right? Buy low, sell high. In the next year or two, this year's calf crop and next year's calf crop, I can retain those heifers pretty cheap because they're not worth as much as their counterparts are going to be in 3 or 4 years. So let's keep back the cheaper heifers that can produce more valuable heifers 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road. Now, with that being said, should you retain heifers this year? Well, what Justin just said about the PDO, the Enzo, right? Next year is not looking great. I might not keep a lot of heifers back this year, right? I might continue to destock, prepare myself for that next swing in the El Nino, La Nina phase, prepare myself to take advantage of that, let my grass recover, make sure that it bounces back. However, again, depending on your heifer development strategy, if you keep those back and you're going to put them in a dry lot anyways, and you have some stored feed, or you can go purchase some feed at an economical price, you may not be damaging the range. If you think your area is going to get wet again next year, right? This is not a terrible strategy, but if we're in for another dry year, the last thing you want to do is keep a heifer back for a year, not cash that check she would have given you this fall, put a bunch of feed costs in here to develop her, and then have to sell her next year before she pays you back for any of those expenses. Again, so the big question is how long will this drought be with us? 1 year, 5 year, 10 years? Justin, we need some answers. Dannele, we need some answers, please. The other option, if you destock heavily this year and it greens up, right? It's already been alluded to here. You can bring some yearlings in, right? I mean, that's the flex strategy. It's a lot of work we've done from New Mexico up to Montana would suggest that having that flex as a way to use the green grass in years it's there as yearlings is a profitable strategy. One of the worst things you can do with a cow is sell her when she's young and productive. So if you've got a heifer that's produced 1 calf and she's pregnant and you don't have grass and sell her, she's not going to pay for herself when you sell her, right? So you want those cows to live out their productive life with you. So when you have extra grass, building your cow herd is problematic because it's going to get dry again. We've seen that. So if you bring in yearlings just for the year or two to take advantage of that extra grass and make a little bit of extra money, that really is a strategy that I think can help. Again, it's a flexible strategy, but again, it's a lot of guys in Wyoming, and 86% of our guys are cow-calf guys. And I say, if you haven't had yearlings out there, just be prepared. It's different, right? I've got younger kids. I'm still prepping for the teenagers, but I imagine it's a lot like having a bunch of teenage boys in the house for a weekend, right? Fences are going to get beat up. Water tanks are going to get beat up. So just be prepared for that. It's a different infrastructure. It's a different way to manage, but you can do it. That is what I had. Annie, any questions before we jump to David?
That was perfect. Thank you so much for putting this in perspective, John. And we'll end this pretty quickly, but really quick, do either of Kenny or Steve want to chime in on anything that John just spoke about?
Well, for me, one of the advantages I have in regards to the markets is we've stepped out of the traditional route of selling calves. We actually we've developed a grass-fed market, so we're not in the commodity market. So that price swing doesn't affect us. In fact, our prices have not gone down. Our demand has gone way up. I don't have enough animals now to sell, which is a good thing to have. Mm-hmm. It's just right now I don't have enough grass to manage everything. So the other thing I was going to say was that because of the composition of our herd, it's real difficult to manage everything. So we've got cow, calf, yearling, and or stocker, what I call stocker, and then the direct market animals. So it's difficult to manage all that. together in light of our grass situation. So
Yep. So COVID's been a good thing for you in terms of direct market sales.
COVID has been fantastic.
Good to hear it.
My phone does not quit ringing.
Great. Kenny, your situation's different because you have quite a few more cattle. Anything that you wanna say? I mean, these are two really different strategies that you both have, and it seems to be working for both of you. Anything you want to add? Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Real quick, what that last comment you said is that they're very different operations and they both work. Is there is no single strategy that's going to work for every ranch. So I always tell people this when I'm giving an extension talk, if your financial advisor or your economist tells you what to do, get a new one, because they don't know your goals, objectives, and situation, right? We can give you ideas and different outlooks, but only you know what's going to work for you to fit both your lifestyle and your business management strategies. So again, we can give you an outlook, but if either one of those tells you here's how you do it, they're a bad example of either one of those categories. So
yeah.
Kenny, did you want to chime in?
Well, yeah, all I was going to say is just like you said. I mean, you can cull some of these older cows and then keep some heifers. They eat a lot less grass, and so those are some things that I look at doing, is getting rid of some old cows and then retaining some heifers, and it gets you down the road a little bit, and they don't eat as much. So it's a way to kind of keep your numbers up, but use less forage.
Right.
So.
Right. Great. Thanks. All right, David. Let's switch to you and a new tool that you have coming up, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, thanks, Annie. I will try to go quickly through this. I'll try to hit on two things that John just highlighted from the economic side. And one he said is you got to know how much forage you have. And the other thing he said is it helps to know where to look for forage, right? So again, I go back to the veg dry. Another great way to use veg dry is just to help you understand what the recent patterns of rainfall are off of your property if you're going to go look for other leases or other sources of forage.
Right.
And so, Steve, you're saying you just don't have grass, but I'd be talking to people in northeastern Pueblo County, or over maybe even in northwestern Crowley County. I mean, there are places out there that, even though southeast Colorado is locked in a drought, there are patches with above average forage, and if those ranchers don't have the capacity to take advantage of it, maybe you can. The other thing I wanted to bring in was estimating forage productivity. Sorry, so when you look at this map, I'm going to go up to northeastern Colorado now, into Weld County, where Justin and I work. Our experimental range is right here, so we're looking pretty white. We are near average to slightly below average because of the recent rains. But what does this mean in terms of actual on-the-ground forage production? Like John said, how many pounds per acre do you have? So what we're working on, this is an example of how we might be able to move forward for individual operations. This is a website that was put together for using remote sensing for the Central Plains Experimental Range. This shows this is the outline of our range. So this is a 16,000 acre property, and it's showing 20 individual pastures that we manage for this rotational herd. This line here shows us where we are, averaged over all 16,000 acres. Where are we in terms of greenness? And so we're, perfectly average would be up here right now. We're at the bottom end of moving into below average. But what does that mean? And then here's a map colored of the condition in terms of greenness in all of our pastures. So you can see it's fairly even across all of them right now. But what does this mean in terms of pounds per acre? So what we can then do is for each of these individual pastures, each one shown on this map is 320 acres, so a half section. We can take that and turn it into pounds per acre. And I'll just show you an example of some drought forage budgeting that we were doing for 2 different herds within the CARM experiment. So we have CARM 1 and CARM 2. Do you see my Excel sheet now?
Yep.
So each of these are 122 yearling herds. And for the first herd, we have 3 pastures that we're hoping to use for that herd in rotation to get us to October 1st for the contract date. And then CARM 2, we have 3 pastures that we hope to use. And we were able to generate, here are our pounds per acre estimated as of June 18th from that remote sensing. So we can get pounds per acre. Then we had some new growth that happened as a result of the rainfall that we received on June 27th. So this is where we estimate we currently are right now in each of these 6 pastures in terms of pounds per acre. And so what we've decided is some of them we're gonna graze down to 300 pounds per acre. These 2 pastures have a little different plant species composition, so we only want to graze them down to 400 pounds per acre. So we can calculate how much grazable forage we have to get us to October in pounds per acre in each of these pastures. Now what we know is we estimate for ours that 122 yearlings in a half section pasture will eat about 8 pounds per acre per day. So we know this is our estimate of how many days we have of available forage to carry that herd in each of these pastures. And then we also know that the longer we leave a herd in a pasture, the more it impacts that vegetation. And we, based on the past 8 years of experience with the stakeholders we work with, especially the ranchers, don't want us grazing any of these pastures for longer than 42 days. So even though we have a lot of foraging here, they don't want us to graze it more than 42 days. So here's the actual grazing days that we think we have in each pasture. And we know that we need 92 days of grazable forage to get us to our contract date. So what we knew as of July 1st, we knew that for this herd, we only have about 86 days of grazable forage, and we think we're going to come up 6 days short. And for this herd of 122 yearlings, we have enough forage to get us through right to 92 days. So this is how we're using the remote sensing. And what I can show you is if we didn't have this rainfall event right here, when I did these calculations on June 20th, we were nowhere going to make it to October 1st. So we were really concerned and starting to have to look at like, okay, should we be looking to move them somewhere off the property, or what are we going to do? But then we caught that rain on June 27th, and that's what's moved us up to where on one herd, we're now just 6 days short. We're going to wait and see what happens with our subsequent forage production, and our other herd, we're right where we want to be. So that's how we're using these actual these remote sensing products that just give you these colored maps to turn it into actual grazing days and try to get to where John wants us to be in knowing our available forage on the ground. And then you can also think about selling early. Like I said, the producers that own these yearlings all want to make it to October 1st. They don't want to sell them earlier this year, but there's a lot of other opportunities to sell earlier if you don't have that contract.
So David, I have one question. Did you measure the new growth? How did you know that you were going to get that much new growth to put into your Excel spreadsheet?
Well,
from the rain event.
That was estimated from experiments that we've done at the experimental range. What we're going to do, what I've asked our remote sensing specialists to do, so right now you can see this goes through July 7th, right? And today is July 10th. When we get to about July 15th, so we have the current week's satellite imagery. About July 15th, we'll re-estimate the biomass just from remote sensing only.
Oh, okay.
And see how that compares with what we predicted to get from that rain. And we'll have a better estimate of exactly what we have on the ground as of July 15th. And we haven't had any rain since June 27th. So nothing's, there's no new inputs of moisture. So probably by July 15th or so, we'll have a pretty good estimate of how much we got total out of that.
Right. But you could say in general, in the blue grama kind of ecosystem, after you got the rain, if we go back to the Excel spreadsheet, you're getting what? How many pounds more? Okay, so
when you have drought-stressed vegetation, which is where we were here, imagine these pastures are mostly blue grama dominated with some western wheat and some needle and thread. And they varied anywhere from 3 crossroads had been grazed heavily. So that one was all the way down to 300 pounds per acre. So this is like pretty much grazed into the ground.
So this is grazed into the ground blue grama.
Yeah, and highway and nighthawk here at 500 to 600 pounds per acre. That was a mixture of standing blue grama, and neither of those pastures have been grazed yet this year. So they've got a mixture of blue grama and western wheatgrass that's standing, but it's drought stress. Like normally at that time of year, we would expect those to be all the way up at about 750 to 800 pounds per acre. So they have not been producing well. They're about 30% below where we would like them to be. What we find is with that kind of drought-stressed vegetation, if you know how much you have, if you put an inch of rain on that, you'll get about a 15% increase in biomass.
Did you say 15?
15. If you put 2 inches of rain on it, if you add 2 inches of rain, you'll get about a 30% increase in biomass. So that's how we estimate what we're going to get. Now, if you have vegetation that's not been drought stressed and you put an inch of rain on it, you're going to get more than 15% increase. This is if you got drought stressed vegetation and you put an inch of rain on it, you're going to get about a 15% increase in biomass.
So when I was measuring Kenny's pasture and he got that incredible increase in production, the plants would have been drought stressed, but there would have been a lot of litter on the ground. So that's probably why he got so much more production.
Yes, and that's why we do it as a percentage. So here, these 3 pastures, in terms of basal cover of vegetation, are all about the same.
Yeah.
Okay. But these two pastures have standing biomass and cover of dead vegetation from last year. So they're going to get a 15% increase above 600, whereas this one's only going to get a 15% increase above 300. At least that's how we budget.
Okay. All right, that's a good clarification. Thank you. Is there anything else you were going to add to that?
No, I do. This is very preliminary.
Yeah.
I mean, we have this up and running and working quite well for these 20 pastures. When you go to Veg Dry, each of these little squares is 1 square kilometer.
Yeah.
So wait, how many acres? 247 acres. Here in these maps, each square is, down at scale of an acre. So you can really zoom in and see within an individual square mile what the variation in forage is. And I can actually see here patterns of lowlands and highlands within these pastures, lowlands and uplands, and how much the forage varies. So that's where we're trying to get it down to where you can actually see on a given ranch, where do I have forage, where don't I have forage, how does it vary within and among my fencing in my pastures and my fencing infrastructure, and how does that translate into pounds per acre? Those are all the difficult things that currently are only at a provisional stage.
Right. Well, I love this tool because I get so many questions on leases. So for me, I'm thinking, or for a rancher, if you're thinking about picking up a lease and really kind of figuring out how much that lease is worth, this tool is fantastic for that.
Yeah, at least the one thing you can do is try to find that lease in Veg Dry.
Yeah, and that too.
is it in, you know, speckled, if it's in an area of speckled white and yellow and green, yeah, I'd go check it out. And if it's over here, definitely not.
Right, right. Okay, great. Well, thanks, David, for showing us all that information. I think let's wrap it up. We've gone over. I mean, this is great. Is there anything else that anyone wants to say before we wrap it up? Did I miss anything? Justin? Nope. Okay, great. Well, thanks so much for everybody joining in. I think this was an awesome discussion, and we are recording this. So we will put it out on CSU's website, our range extension website, Facebook, and then anyone else who wants to post it. So thanks everybody so much for joining in.
Annie, I'll just add for any producers or land managers that are watching, you know, like John and others said, we would be irresponsible if we gave you answers as extension agents and agency personnel, but we are here to help, and we're going to put our contacts at the end of this video. If there's any of these tools that you're interested in learning more about, or for all of us, but particularly those of us in extension, anything at all that we can help with to help you get a little closer to your answer that you're looking for, or any management decisions you need to make, please do not hesitate to reach out. That's what we're here for. That's what we're paid to do.
Great.
And thank you all the panelists.
After visiting your extension agent or educator, also stop by your nearest USDA service center. Be sure to check in with your Farm Service Agency folks or your Natural Resources Conservation Service folks, and they have programs that might be able to help you, you know, get through this year's drought or become more resilient in the future.
Great. Thanks, Dannele.